The moment I heard my son's voice through the kitchen wall, something cold settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the November air seeping under the back door. My name is James. I am 67 years old. I spent 22 years in the United States Navy, another 18 building a small plumbing supply business from 3 employees to 41, and the last 2 years since selling that business trying to figure out what retirement was supposed to feel like. I had survived 2 deployments, a Category 4 hurricane that leveled half my warehouse, and the slow, grinding grief of losing my wife Eleanor to pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. I thought I knew what hard felt like. I thought nothing could knock me sideways anymore. I was wrong. I had stopped by my son's house that Tuesday afternoon to drop off a cordless drill I had borrowed 3 weeks earlier. Simple errand, 10 minutes at most. My son's truck was in the driveway, which surprised me. He was a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company and usually on the road until 6 or later. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I tried the handle, found it unlocked the way they always left it for me, and stepped into the entryway, setting the drill case down quietly so I wouldn't interrupt anything. That was when I heard him. His voice was coming from the den at the end of the hall, low and tight in the way it got when he was stressed about money. I had heard that tone a dozen times over the past year. The investment properties he and his wife had bought at the peak of the market. The refinancing that had not gone the way they planned. The second mortgage on their house that he had mentioned once and immediately tried to take back, as if he regretted saying it out loud. I did not call out. I should have. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I did not just clear my throat, announce myself, walk in with the drill and a smile. But something in that tightness in his voice made me go still instead. She already knows the timing, he said. She's been watching the weather windows for 2 weeks. A pause. His wife's voice, lower, harder to catch from where I stood. I know it's not cheap, he said. But think about what we're talking about here. The life insurance alone is $400,000. The business sale, money, the house, the accounts, we're talking close to $1 million too. That wipes everything out and we start over clean. The life insurance, my life insurance. Eleanor and I had taken it out in our 40s, and I had kept it current without thinking much about it, naming my son the sole beneficiary after she passed. The business sale money was sitting in a retirement account. The house was the one Eleanor and I had bought the year we got married, the one I had put $40,000 of sweat equity into with my own hands, the one where my son had grown up, sleeping in the back bedroom, under a ceiling I had painted myself. She said the river conditions in late November are perfect for it, he continued. Visibility drops, current runs fast, cold enough that even a strong swimmer doesn't last long. A man his age, a wet wading accident, it's not even suspicious. People die on those rivers every season. I felt the wall against my back and realized I had stepped sideways without knowing it. She's done it before, he said. Not exactly this, but she knows how to make things look like what they're supposed to look like. That's all I'm saying. His wife said something sharp. He lowered his voice further. I'm not saying I like it. I'm saying we're out of options. The bank doesn't care that we had bad timing. The foreclosure notice doesn't care. And Dad could live another 20 years. He ran a marathon last spring. He's not going anywhere on his own. I ran a half marathon. I had mentioned it at Thanksgiving like it was nothing, and he had clapped me on the shoulder and said he was proud of me. I remembered the way it felt, his hand on my shoulder. I remembered thinking my son was a good man. I walked backward out of that entryway with the kind of careful, deliberate quiet I had not used since I was 24 years old, moving through a ship's corridor in the dark. I pulled the front door shut behind me without a sound. I sat in my truck at the end of the block for 45 minutes before I could trust my hands on the wheel. 3 days later, I was sitting across from a woman named Carol Hutchins, in the office above her bail bonds storefront on the east side of the city. Carol had spent 16 years as a county sheriff's investigator before opening her own practice. My neighbor Frank had used her during a property dispute 2 years back and said she was the sharpest person he had ever paid money to. I told her everything. She listened without writing anything down, which told me she had a very good memory, or had heard worse things and no longer needed notes. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. "What you have right now is nothing," she said. Not unkindly, just directly. You have what you heard, without a recording, without documentation of a transaction, without something that puts a third party in contact with your son and a specific plan. You have a conversation. A defense attorney would shred in 40 minutes. So, what do I do? She leaned back. 2 weeks ago, your son told you about a fly fishing trip he was booking for you in Montana. A retirement gift. You told me that. You said he was almost too enthusiastic about it. Kept bringing up how remote the river was. How it was the best late-season steelhead water in the country. He showed me photos, which he had clearly already researched extensively. She paused. I think the trip is the plan. I think whoever this woman is, this she he mentioned, is already up there, or will be. I think the accident your son described is supposed to happen on that river. He wants me to go. He's counting on you going. You haven't given him any reason to think you heard anything. If you cancel now, if you act strange or pull away, they'll know something is wrong. They'll wait. They'll try again another way. And you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder without any proof of what they intended. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. Or you go, she said. And you don't go alone. Carol had contacts she trusted in the investigative community across several states. She knew a man named Ray Pilcher who ran a small private security firm in Billings and had spent 8 years as a Montana fish, wildlife, and parks warden before that. She made a phone call while I sat there. By that evening, Ray and I had spoken twice, and a plan was taking shape that I did not entirely love, but could not argue with. Ray would drive up separately, check into a different motel in the nearest town, and maintain contact with me through a satellite communicator, a small device the size of a deck of cards that worked without cell service and could send short messages, GPS coordinates, and an emergency SOS that would go directly to a monitoring center. He drilled me on how to use it for 20 minutes on our second call. He also sent me, through Carol, a compact recording unit that clipped inside the chest pocket of a vest and captured audio up to 30 feet in most conditions. He had me practice activating it by feel without looking down. Before I left, I sat with my attorney, Gerald Park, for 2 hours and rewrote my estate documents from scratch. The life insurance beneficiary changed to a charitable foundation I had quietly set up in Eleanor's name. The house went into a trust, administered by Gerald, with explicit instructions for its sale, proceeds to fund college scholarships for children of first responders. The retirement accounts were restructured with a nonprofit as primary beneficiary. My son received a specific bequest, $1, and a letter explaining that I loved him but that I was not a fool. Gerald gave me a sealed copy to take with me. I drove to a UPS store, mailed another copy to Carol, and a third to Ray. If something happened to me, there would be no mystery about what I knew and when I knew it. My son dropped me at the airport on a Thursday morning. He hugged me at the curb, told me the fresh air would do me good, said he wished he could come. His wife kissed my cheek and told me to send pictures. I thanked them both and told them I was looking forward to it. I meant none of that and every word of it at the same time. I watched them drive away in my son's car, and then I turned and walked into the terminal. The lodge was called Stillwater Run, and it sat at the end of 12 miles of gravel road in a river valley in the western part of the state, surrounded by lodgepole pine and open sky. The main building was log construction, well maintained, with a stone fireplace in the common room that was already lit when I arrived. The owner, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s named Cal, greeted me like I was the only guest he had expected all year. He showed me to a cabin 20 yards from the riverbank, told me breakfast was at 6:30, and said my guide would meet me at the boat dock at 7. My guide's name was Pete. He was in his early 40s, barrel-chested, with the patient, measured manner of someone who spent most of his life outdoors and had learned to wait out anything. He knew the river the way I knew the layout of my own warehouse, which is to say completely and without having to think about it. He waded into current that looked violent to me and stood in it like he was standing on a sidewalk. He read water by looking at its surface, pointing out things I could not see. He was, in every observable way, exactly what he appeared to be, a fishing guide. I watched him anyway. I watched everyone. There were 4 other guests at the lodge that week. A father and his adult son from Georgia who had been coming every year for a decade, easy and familiar with Cal and the staff. A retired schoolteacher from Oregon who was fly fishing for the first time and kept laughing at herself whenever she tangled her line. And a man named Martin. Martin arrived the same afternoon I did, driving himself in a dark green Jeep with Idaho plates. He was somewhere in his 50s, lean and quiet, with the kind of stillness that could have been peaceful or could have been something else. He did not fish with a guide. He said he preferred to wade on his own, knew the area well, had fished this stretch of river before. Cal seemed mildly surprised by this most guests-booked guided days, but did not argue. Martin ate dinner at a corner table, answered questions politely, and volunteered nothing. I watched him watching Pete once across the common room, just for a moment, and something about the direction of that look made the hair on my arms stand up. Not the look of one outdoorsman assessing another. Something calibrating. I messaged Ray that night from my cabin. New guest, Martin, Idaho plates, came alone, watching the guide, off feeling. Ray's reply came back within the hour. Noted, running the plates. Keep distance. Do not change behavior. The next morning, Pete took me to a bend in the river 3 miles upstream where a gravel bar created a perfect feeding lane for steelhead. We worked it for 4 hours. It was extraordinary. Actually, the cold, clean air, the mountains holding the early light, the weight of a strong fish running downstream on the line. Under any other circumstances, I would have been completely happy. Instead, I was running a quiet inventory every 20 minutes, where Pete was standing, where the bank dropped off sharply, where the current was fast enough to do serious damage to a man who went into it unprepared. On the second afternoon, I made a point of talking with Martin at dinner. I asked about Idaho, about his fishing background, about what brought him to this particular lodge, this particular week. He was smooth, friendly enough to not be memorable. Said he had heard about the late-season steelhead fishing from a friend. Said he liked places that were off the beaten path. Said he preferred the solitude of fishing alone. Smart, I said. Too many people are too dependent on guides. A man ought to know how to take care of himself in the field. Martin looked at me for just a beat longer than the comment warranted. Couldn't agree more, he said. That night I sent Ray. Talk to Martin. Too smooth. Doesn't volunteer anything, but has a ready answer for everything. Feels rehearsed. Ray's reply. Plates registered to a woman in Twin Falls. Not his vehicle. No criminal record under the name Martin, but running variations. Stay close to Pete. Do not wade alone. On the third morning, Pete had a family matter that pulled him away until noon. Cal offered to reassign me to the other guide on staff for the morning, a younger man named Danny. I said I was happy to wait on my own, that I had been watching Pete work the upstream section and wanted to try a particular riffle I had spotted from the bank. I knew, as I said it, that I was doing the thing Ray had told me not to do. But I also knew that if Martin was going to move, he was going to move when I was alone, and I could not gather evidence of anything if I was never in position for it to happen. I sent Ray my coordinates before I left, and set the satellite communicator to transmit my location every 15 minutes automatically. I tucked the recording device into my vest, ran my thumb over the activation button twice to confirm it by feel, and walked down to the river. I waded upstream slowly, working the runs Pete had shown me, keeping my eyes on the water in front of me and listening to everything behind me. The river was loud in the canyon section, but opened up where I was standing, the sound dropping to a steady low rush. When I heard footsteps on the gravel bank, I did not turn right away. Martin's voice came from 10 feet behind me and slightly uphill. Nice morning for it. I turned, keeping my posture easy. He was standing on the bank in chest waders, rod in hand, looking up and down the river. It is, I said. Pete says this riffle turns on late morning when the light hits the other bank. Martin moved closer, stepping off the bank and into the shallows. The gravel was loose at that edge, and I watched him find his footing. He was comfortable in the water, more comfortable than most recreational fishermen. We fished in parallel for a while, maybe 20 minutes, and the conversation was light. His technique was good, better than it should have been for someone who claimed to be an occasional hobbyist. His casts were efficient, and his line management was clean. The kind of thing you got from repetition over years, not from occasional trips. "You seem like you've spent some serious time on the water," I said. "Some," he said. "What do you do for work when you're not out here?" "Consulting," he said. He paused. "Problem solving, mostly. Someone has a situation that needs handling. They call me." "What kind of situations?" He looked at me. The fishing rod was in his left hand now, and he was standing at about a 45-degree angle to the current, which put his body between me and the bank. "Complicated ones," he said. "The kind where the regular channels don't work or take too long." "Sounds interesting." "It has its moments." He took 2 steps toward me, slow and natural-looking, as if he was simply repositioning for a cast. The current between us and the far bank was fast and deep. "You're not a bad fisherman for someone who said he'd never done this before." I had not told Martin I had never fly-fished before. I had told Cal that, on the first afternoon, during check-in, Cal could have mentioned it, or Martin had spoken to someone who had access to my registration information. "I've been watching Pete," I said. "Good teacher." "Pete's a good guy," Martin said. "Genuine. Some people in service industries put on a face, but Pete is exactly what he looks like." He paused again. "You know what I've always respected about people like Pete? They're predictable. You know exactly where they're going to be and when. Makes everything simpler." The recording device was running. I had activated it when I left the cabin that morning, and it had been on for 2 hours. "Martin," I said, "let me be straightforward with you." His expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture. The rod moved slightly to a more neutral position. "My son paid you to come here," I said. "I don't know what he told you about me, but whatever you were paid, it came from a man who is 3 months from a foreclosure notice and cannot afford to follow through. The money he promised you doesn't exist in any form he can actually access. Not anymore." Martin was very still. The river moved around both of us, and the mountains held their positions. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. His voice was flat now. The friendly texture was completely gone. "My son contacted someone in the past 4 weeks about arranging an accident on a river in Montana for an older man who would be there alone," I said. He described the conditions, the cold water, the current, the isolation. He used the words, "wet waiting accident." Those are very specific words. Martin looked at the water, then at me, then at the far bank. "That's an interesting story," he said. "He paid you half up front," I said. "I'm guessing the other half was on delivery, which means you came up here on the expectation of a significant payout, and you're not going to get it. The accounts that money was coming from were restructured by my attorney 11 days ago. There is nothing to inherit. The life insurance named him as beneficiary past tense. Whatever he told you about what this was worth, the number was a lie." "You don't know anything about any payment," he said. "I know what I heard my son say through his kitchen wall 3 weeks ago. I know he said 400,000 in life insurance and $1.2 million total. I know he said you or someone in your position had done this before, that you knew how to make things look the right way." I watched his face. "I also know that everything you've said to me in the last 40 minutes has been recorded." He moved fast. I had expected it, and I was already moving, but he was faster than I had given him credit for, and the water was working against both of us. He grabbed for my vest, trying to pull me toward the deep channel, and I drove my elbow into his arm and stepped hard downstream, letting the current help me instead of fighting it, something Pete had demonstrated twice, and I had filed away without knowing why. Martin went forward when I stepped back, lost his footing on the submerged gravel, and then the current took him sideways, and he was fighting to stand up instead of fighting me. I waited hard for the bank. My waders filled with cold water above the waist before I found purchase on the gravel shelf and hauled myself out. I activated the SOS on the satellite communicator with my thumb while I was still dragging myself up the bank. My legs were shaking from the cold and from adrenaline and from something older and heavier that I did not have a name for. Martin found the shallows 40 feet downstream and crawled out cursing. He was not going anywhere fast. Hypothermia works quickly on a man who has gone fully into November water in Montana, and he had gone in much deeper than I had. Ray arrived from the direction of the Lodge Road in Cal's truck 22 minutes later, with Cal and Danny and a rifle in a soft case that Ray handled like he had been carrying rifles his entire adult life. Ray had been parked 2 miles down the road since I sent him my morning coordinates, close enough to respond but far enough that his presence would not change Martin's behavior. That had been the plan. I had not entirely believed it until the moment the truck came over the rise. The Lincoln County Sheriff's deputies arrived an hour and 40 minutes after that. Martin was wrapped in blankets in the common room with a deputy on either side of him. He had stopped talking entirely, which his attorney would later tell a judge was the smartest thing he had done all week. The recording from my vest captured 6 minutes of conversation on the river, including his statement about consulting work and problem-solving situations that needed handling, and his inability to explain what he did not know about any payment when I put the payment to him directly. The FBI field office in Missoula sent 2 agents the following morning. They had already been on a plane before sunrise, because the communications my son had used to contact Martin had left a trail through a third-party intermediary that the Bureau had been watching for 18 months in connection with a separate investigation. My son had not found a careful professional. He had found someone whose phone was already being monitored. My son and his wife were arrested at their house on a Thursday afternoon, 10 days after I had flown to Montana. I was back home by then, sitting in Carol's office, when she got the call. She told me in the same direct way she had told me everything else, without wrapping it in softness. I said thank you, picked up my jacket, and drove home. The arraignment was 3 weeks later. I sat in the gallery and watched my son walk to the defense table in a suit that was too large for him now, because he had lost weight. He did not look at me until the judge asked him to state his name for the record. Then he turned, not toward the judge, but toward the gallery, and our eyes met for a moment that I have not been able to fully describe to anyone who has asked. It was not anger on his face. It was something worse than anger. It was the look of a man who understood, completely and too late, the size of what he had done. I looked back at him steadily. Then the judge spoke, and his attention went forward. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for most of a day. My attorney, Gerald, sat 2 rows behind me the whole time and did not say a word, which was exactly what I needed. I told the jury what I had heard in the entryway, what I had seen on my son's face when he came home from work and found me sitting at his kitchen table the week before I went to Montana. I had manufactured a reason to be there, a question about a bill, to observe whether his behavior toward me had changed. It had not. He had been warm, attentive, poured me coffee, walked me out to my truck. I had driven home and sat in my driveway for a long time, thinking about what it meant that my son could do that. The jury deliberated for 2 days, guilty on all counts. My son received 22 years. His wife received 16. Martin cooperated with federal prosecutors in connection with the broader investigation, and his sentencing was deferred. I walked out of the courthouse, into February cold, and stood on the steps for a moment without moving. Ray was parked across the street and lifted a hand when he saw me. I walked over. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. That was the honest answer. I drove home to the house Eleanor and I had bought in the first year of our marriage, the house my son had grown up in, the house I had been prepared to see sold off to pay his debts. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard where the oak tree Eleanor had planted from a sapling when our son was born was now 40 feet tall with a trunk I could not wrap both arms around. It took me a month to decide what I was going to do. Cal had called twice since I left the lodge. The second call was more specific. He had been planning an expansion, 2 additional cabins on the north end of the property, a covered equipment storage building, improvements to the access road that currently turned into a mess in spring thaw. His contractor had backed out of the project over a permit dispute, and Cal was looking at a summer construction season with no one to run it. He knew from our conversations at the lodge that I had spent years in business, that I understood construction, that I was not afraid of hard work or hard weather. "I can't pay you what you were making," Cal said. "That's not the issue," I said. "What is the issue?" I thought about Eleanor's oak tree in the backyard. I thought about my son's face at the defense table. I thought about the way the river had looked in the early morning light on the day I had stood in it and waited to see what was coming. "I need to know the work is real," I said. "I need to be somewhere that things get built." that I can offer you, Cal said. The house sold in late March. Before closing, I walked through every room one more time and said what I needed to say to Eleanor in the way I had been saying things to her since she died, which was quietly and without expecting an answer. I said I was sorry I could not make our son into something better. I said I knew that was not my failure to own alone. I said I was going to go somewhere beautiful and build something useful and try to find out what the years I had left were actually for. The charitable foundation Gerald administered made its first scholarship grant that same week. 4 college freshmen from families of firefighters and paramedics in our county received letters telling them their first year of tuition had been covered by a gift from Eleanor's memory. I read the copies Gerald sent me twice. That was the only moment in all of it when I came close to crying, which probably tells you something about what I carry and wear. I drove north in April, pulling a trailer with what I needed and leaving behind what I did not. The road to Stillwater Run was muddy from the thaw, the mountains still carrying snow on their upper faces, the river running high and fast and clear. Cal met me at the main building with coffee and a folder of building plans and a look on his face that said he was glad I had come. Pete was there. He had spent the winter doing carpentry work on the lodge's interior, trim and shelving, and a new bar top in the common room from a single slab of walnut he had been drying for 2 years. He showed me the building plans for the new cabins, pointed out a framing detail he was uncertain about, and we spent an hour at the kitchen table going through it with pencils and a calculator. That was the beginning of it. I am not going to tell you I found peace quickly, or that the mountains made the grief smaller, or that hard work is a cure for the particular kind of damage that comes from understanding your only child as he truly was. None of that is how it works. I think about my son every day. I think about the boy he was before something in him turned wrong, or before I failed to see what he was becoming, which are questions I will probably never answer to my satisfaction. But I also think about what it means to still be here. Martin is alive, which I am grateful for in a way I could not have predicted when I was crawling up that gravel bank with my waders full of cold water. My son is alive. I did not want anyone dead. I wanted the truth out, where it could not hide anymore. And that is what happened. I am 68 years old as of last Tuesday. Cal made a cake. Pete and Danny and the seasonal staff sang off-key in the kitchen, and it was the most embarrassing and the most welcome thing that had happened to me in years. I fished the morning before breakfast and caught a steelhead that ran me 60 yards downstream before I turned it, and I stood in the cold river holding it for a moment in both hands before I let it go, watching it hold in the current and then disappear into the depth. The new cabins are framed and will be closed in before the first heavy snow of next season. The access road is graded and graveled, and Cal can now bring guests in after a week of rain without apology. I have started on plans for a small equipment barn that will double as a winter workshop, and that I am building partly from materials salvaged from a collapsed outbuilding on the property's north edge, because I was raised not to waste good timber. My son tried to turn my death into a transaction. He calculated the number carefully, decided I was worth more gone than present, and set something in motion that he did not understand he could not control. What he did not calculate was that I had spent my life moving through hard things without stopping. What he did not calculate was Eleanor, who raised me to be stubborn about the right things in the way that people who have lived through real difficulty learn to be. What he did not calculate was that a man who has stood in front of a fire, and a man who has stood in the deck of a ship in bad weather, and a man who has run a business through a recession is not a man who lies down when the current runs. Here hard. I wake up here most mornings before Cal's alarm clock goes off, and I walk down to the river while the light is still flat and gray, and I stand on the bank and listen to the water move. There are mornings when the pain is fresh and specific, and I let myself feel it fully, because I learned from Eleanor that what you don't feel will find another way out. And then I go in for breakfast, and I start the day's work, and I build something that was not there before. That is what I have. A river. Work that uses my hands. A table where I am known and welcome. A life my son tried to take, which I am living with the particular attention of someone who understands what it means that it almost wasn't. My name is James Reed. I am 68 years old. My son hired a man to drown me in a Montana river for my retirement account. I am still here. Every morning I am still here is a decision to keep building. That is the whole story, and every word of it is mine.